The Mass Effect franchise is a series that is near and dear to my heart. I played Mass Effect 1 when there was a blizzard outside and I was stranded at home for half a week. Naturally, I binged the game. And while it was the slowest paced game I have ever played, I had the intention of making it to Mass Effect 2 and really seeing why people love this franchise. Mass Effect 2 and 3 were both amazing and really solidified their place among my favorites in gaming. To think, all it took for me to try this amazing series was a blizzard outside my home. Fast forward 5 years after the launch of Mass Effect 3 to 2017, and the next game, Mass Effect Andromeda, released to millions of Mass Effect fans and diehards to a, well, very bad reception. Andromeda released in a state that was filled with bugs and a feeling of a smaller scope than the original trilogy. This game was meant to be the start of a brand new Mass Effect trilogy, helmed by a different studio under the BioWare umbrella, BioWare Montreal. You see, first impressions are often what makes or breaks a game in this industry. If something doesn't land right, the internet itself latches on to that aspect and the game essentially dies in the public eye after months or years of ridicule. Don't get me wrong, video games can have comeback stories like No Man's Sky or even Final Fantasy XIV, both of which launched to massive ridicule and thought dead on arrival. However, both games never gave up and kept getting better and better over time, where people only see their massive success stories nowadays. And that right there is a fantastic thing, of course. Mass Effect Andromeda, on the other hand, was seen as an abject failure in the eyes of everyone, publisher EA included. BioWare Montreal was told to stop working on the game after so many bug fixes and updates went into it. Andromeda was thereby suspended indefinitely, and the Montreal team was disbanded and absorbed into EA's other developer studios. BioWare Montreal no longer exists. Everyone likes a comeback story. Where No Man's Sky and Final Fantasy XIV got their comebacks, Mass Effect Andromeda wasn't given the chance to have theirs. This is nothing new in an industry that's extremely volatile and has to change with the times. Nobody blames EA for making this obvious decision. But while Andromeda was seen by many as a terrible game and stopped from making any more in its spin-off series, I decided to take a look at the game to see what all the rage and anger was all about. And as you can see by the title of this video, I came away from the game with a much more positive perspective on the game. Sure, it might not get the sequels that it was planned for, but that doesn't mean it's not worth a playthrough. Obviously, I played it after all the bug fixes and updates were implemented a long time ago, but the point is to allow people who want to dip their toes into the game can do so regardless of when they get the game themselves. With the new Mass Effect game being on the far horizon, I wanted to take a look at Andromeda and see what could have been and where things were going. We don't know where the next game is going to be placed, but time will tell on that front. I've seen many people and gaming outlets compare Andromeda to that of Mass Effect 3. I think it's unfair to compare Andromeda, a game that's the first in its spin-off series, to a game that's had 2 games build up to work off of narratively. If anything, Andromeda should be compared to Mass Effect 1 for its story. Neither have games prior to them, and they're both the first in their respective stories. Yes, Andromeda does technically have the original trilogy's lore to go off of, however, that's only to a point. That's something I'll explain a bit later. When I make these in defense of videos, it's with the knowledge that it's long after the initial launch of the game, after plenty of fixes have been implemented to make these games as smooth as possible, where if someone doesn't know what to play on a rainy day, they can look here and see a list of reasons why some games that were critically panned on launch are still worthy of a playthrough and can be enjoyable. Video games don't have to die on release. This is an industry that keeps moving forward no matter what setbacks happen. Because of this, many people have a hard time looking back on games they pass by, or even have backlogs that they never touch. I want to talk about what I think the game did well, and what I really enjoyed from it. I'm here to speak in defense of Mass Effect Andromeda. So while Mass Effect Andromeda is a very narrative-driven story game, let's first start with the fundamentals that make up video games, the gameplay. So the gameplay for Andromeda feels very similar to that of Mass Effect 3, with having a more fluid combat system, but with the added part of having much better mobility to move around the area. You can jump in this game as well as dash right from the get-go. It adds a sense of verticality to the fights as your feet aren't just firmly planted on the ground at all times. Just make sure not to jump off the edge. The cover system works generally the same. I'm not 100% certain if you have the option to go from cover to cover via a prompt like in 3, but the addition of the dash would make that redundant anyway. Essentially, fight starts, find cover, shoot the enemies, and use your abilities to hit said enemies that are also behind cover. You can even blind shoot from cover as long as you don't aim down your sights, so you have max protection while still hitting the enemies. Firing your guns in the game is done in the gaming standard way. On controller, you hold L2 or left trigger to aim down the sights of your gun, and R2 or right trigger to fire. On mouse, right click to aim, left click to shoot. Abilities are mapped to the top left and right buttons on controllers and set to numbered hotkeys on keyboard and mouse, but you can only have 3 of them. The gunplay feels good and weighty for various weapons. Pistols feel quick and responsive, snipers feel powerful and tactical, and even assault rifles feel good and heavy-hitting for packs of enemies. Once you add in the aforementioned skills, you have quite the arsenal to fight with, all while your companions are using their weapons and skills to help you out too. The game having very solid and satisfying gunplay with fun mobility really adds to the combat being more in control of the player. Both are great in their own rights, and the addition of dashes also helps you to run to different places faster in the game between combat. It's quite fun to jump over objects and dart around people too. Gate with a checkpoint building to walk through? No problem. Now here's where it starts to differ between Andromeda and the previous games. In Andromeda, you can have 4 sets of favorites and can swap them in the midst of battle. So essentially, you can go from using a loadout of tech skills that you set up to another loadout of biotic skills that you also set up yourself. Now, while there is a cooldown placed on all your skills when you do switch to different skill loadouts, you can still do this in the middle of battle. Essentially, let's say you come up against a bunch of enemies that are giving you a tough time on your biotic setup. You can then switch over to your tech skills quickly and start unloading on the enemy then. Heck, you can even mix and match skills from combat biotics and tech. There's these things called profiles in the game where you get bonuses for your various skills. So when you match them up accordingly, it helps out to make your skills even stronger. You have 3 profiles that are meant for going 100% in one of the 3 skill trees. Soldier for combat, engineer for tech, and adept for biotics. But then you have another 4 which blend the various skills together, and the profile that works with them helps you to make the build even stronger. Sentinel is tech and biotics. Vanguard is combat and biotics. Infiltrator is combat and tech. And finally, Explorer is the jack of all trades, master of none. The more skill points you acquire in each of the skill trees, the higher level bonuses you get from each profile. So when you match a profile to the skills you use, you get even stronger. There's plenty of skills to choose from as well as passive skills to put points into. Never being shackled to a single loadout of skills feels like a great way to make sure the combat can keep flowing and have you in control of what you're doing. Since this is a Mass Effect game, you also have companions that you take with you wherever you go. You take 2 of them and have a total of 6 to choose from. They all have their own skills that you can level up to make them even stronger as well. Combat aside, the Mako is back and it's called the Nomad this time, and boy does it work so much better than the Mako did in Mass Effect 1. It actually feels like a vehicle with weight, and it even has settings you can add on top of it to change how it moves through terrain. Steep incline giving you trouble? 6-wheel mode. You might move slower, but getting up hills works. You can jump with the vehicle and even use a boost to move faster. Having the Nomad definitely helps with traversing around these big open world maps for each of the planets that you can visit. Get ready for my new Extreme Sports tryout. planets are big and varied with what kinds of terrain you'll be going over. Examples from the snow and ice planet Vold to that of the scorching desert of Eladin. Both of which have gameplay mechanics involved with surviving the blistering cold as well as the scorching heat. There's plenty of places to go and plenty of enemies around while also not overstaying their welcome. Since it's a big open world map, open world games tend to have issues where they can be seen as very dead with not enough wildlife or enemies to do stuff with, or too cluttered. You get both here, but in different ways, and for me, it works to this game's benefit. When it comes to this game's location of Andromeda, the planets are supposed to be uninhabitable or degrading. With that in mind, having big open world spaces makes sense in terms of the lore. But what happens in those spots for the gameplay? Well, you can grab materials, find hidden chests, and just ride around in a nomad doing sick tricks. On the opposite spectrum, there's a planet where the map is smaller but much more cluttered. Because of this, you can't use the nomad on it due to the foliage being everywhere, but everything is within walking distance. You also have enemy groups in closer vicinities and hit them more frequently. So essentially, you have both of those issues in Andromeda, but I do think that they're very passable and work well. Having a variety of planets that have distinct looks and feels with various kinds of wildlife is a great way to help keep the sites being varied enough so we don't get bored. In fact, the art team did a fantastic job at creating these worlds. I've stopped plenty of times just to soak in the sights. Exploring in Andromeda isn't limited to the planets you can land on either. You have an entire cluster in Andromeda as the map that you can fly around in, visit various solar systems, head to the planets to scout them out with probes to get more materials. Even using probes to find hidden objects to visit in various solar systems such as comets, wrecked ships, and asteroids. While we're talking about materials, you can research and develop weapons, armor, and augmentations from 3 different areas: Milky Way items, the Helios cluster items, and an ancient race set of items as well. Researching takes research points. You get research points simply by scanning various objects out in the world that you visit. Simply bring out your scanner and hit scan on the items covered in red. It's that simple. The more you scan, the more points you have for researching. And researching can make the items even stronger with different levels to choose. Once that's done, simply go to development and make the item. Even add mods to it. All in all, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the gameplay. It still has a Mass Effect feel to it with a lot of the same systems and abilities, so feel free to experiment with the various profiles and explore the system with breathtaking visuals.
Impressive.
Now, we're going to hop right into the world and setting. So Andromeda is a completely new galaxy to explore. In fact, the story takes place with the various races from the Milky Way galaxy going to Andromeda for the first time with a flight time of just over 600 years. Because of how little we actually know about the various worlds in the real-life Andromeda, the devs were able to let their imaginations go wild in this aspect. The cluster is big enough with a lot of solar systems in it, and you have about 10 places you can land on and explore. Exploring these places, or just there to get quests and talk with people, is very much a large portion of the game. None of the planets are very habitable for various story and gameplay reasons. The Andromeda Initiative was tasked with heading to Andromeda and colonizing the galaxy, as well as finding out what's out there. 600 years pass, and things have changed considerably from what people saw from the Milky Way galaxy, so the setting starts off rough for the Initiative. Having access to flying to these various worlds and finding out what changed from when they saw it 600 years ago to now is part of the mission of colonizing the galaxy. Finding other alien species is something to be expected, and something that, spoiler alert, does in fact happen. Having just gotten to Andromeda after 600 years of cryosleep, it's safe to assume that this initiative has no way of communicating with anyone from their old home in the Milky Way. Because they're so far away, they can't just go back or ask for help. They're effectively on their own out here to build up their civilizations, not quite from scratch, but close to it. This group of races knows everything in the Milky Way galaxy up to the point when they first launched. Everything that's happened back there since is not possible for these people to know. Looking to the past is pointless. Looking toward the future and building up is what matters out here. The planet being different from what everyone was expecting 600 years ago is only the start of the issues they face. Mutiny.
I don't need evidence to put a bullet in your skull.
Hostile aliens.
I've been in this forsaken cluster for decades, surrounded by amoeba.
Racism.
Your people are a joke.
These are a few of the issues they come across in this new galaxy. The more they explore, the more similarities they find between the home they left and this new location. The only difference being, this is the start of their work. Hostile aliens out there with an unknown number to their species. Couple that with the fact that not only does the initiative have a finite amount of people, a very large portion is either missing or still in cryosleep. You can't just wake everyone up with no way of sustaining them all, let alone fight back against an entire race that's been well established in Andromeda as a whole to begin with. All of these issues are all piled on all at once. The scales are stacked against the initiative. It's up to the Pathfinders, one person for each arc, transporting entire races to Andromeda, to go out with their crews and find livable planets to start colonizing and getting a foothold. This setting is not only a worst-case scenario to start with, it's entirely believable to back it up. If you send a number of arcs containing about 20,000 people on each one to a galaxy over a span of 600 years in cryosleep, not only are things changing in this location with that amount of time passing completely understandable, but you're going over there with maybe 100,000 people to a location with a plan on how to get started. Being on the back foot as 100,000 versus an already established race of billions or more is to be expected if things go south. This is a great setup to a story where you are the underdog in every way. The stakes are high, and the Pathfinder is on the back foot. Everyone loves a good come-from-behind storyline, and this gives you all the necessary information to start said story with. Where the main character goes from here is ultimately up to the writers and the player, since this game is choice-driven, where your choices have consequences.
Sniper, his sights are set on snow.
Bang.
Speaking of narrative choices with consequences, let's move on over to the story, quests, and characters. Now, BioWare is well known around the world to be a juggernaut in the narrative field of video games. They like to make their games around the story itself and like to have choice and consequences be a major gameplay factor in these game worlds. That being said, one of the major complaints about Mass Effect Andromeda has been about the story. From what I've seen online, while there are story parts that people don't like from it, saying it feels off from a Mass Effect game, I've seen quite a few reviews comparing the story to Mass Effect 3. There's a fundamental difference between 3's story that's been built up to a fever pitch with the Reapers attacking the whole galaxy from the 2 games before it, to that of Andromeda being the first in its section far away from the troubles of the Milky Way. To compare a new story to another that's been in the works for years is pretty unreasonable. I said before that if a comparison should be made, it should be made to that of the first in the original trilogy, since both are the first in their respective stories and are the jumping off point for the worlds they exist in. So now, since this is a heavy story-driven game, I will be talking about some spoilers while trying to avoid as much as possible. Alright, let's talk story. When it comes to the story of Andromeda, I talked about what was going on with the setting in the previous section, so I'll do a very quick rundown. You, Andromeda Initiative, get to Andromeda, problems, aliens, mutiny. Alright, I think we're caught up. So you wake up from cryosleep and find all these issues going on. Nothing seems to be the way it was supposed to be when you woke up from your 600-year nap. So, as the player, it's your job to find out the mysteries of what happened in that 600 years to change what the initiative saw 600 years ago from the Milky Way. You are, insert name here, Ryder. You are the Pathfinder from the human arc after a bad turn of events leaves you with a position. You get a crew and go out on your quest amongst the stars in the Helios cluster to start searching for, or making, livable worlds for everyone that traveled with you to this new galaxy. This being a Mass Effect game, there's a lot of dialogue, choices, and relationships for you to work with. You have your crew that you have talks with on the ship about certain things with them.
One hell of a trip this is turning out to be. Hostiles, ruined worlds, no home in sight.
Things that happen in the story.
So much for centuries of wisdom and experience, huh?
Guess we're all just bailing each other out.
And their own personal stories in Andromeda.
Made it through the Krogan rebellions. Watched my culture disintegrate. Survived centuries as a merc. And all sorts of pirate shenanigans.
You get to see what drives these characters forward, their relationships with certain factions and characters, and how they change over time as they give you missions eventually leading up to their loyalty mission. Not only are you able to interact with your companions, but they also interact and talk with each other while out in the world. You get to see them talk mostly while riding in the Nomad, and it always starts with the different combinations working together for the first time. Out of the 35+ hour playthrough that I did, I don't think I've heard them repeat any single dialogue with each other whatsoever. That's commendable and helps to make them feel more real. Considering how often in games that repeating dialogue occurs, this is a fantastic way to make a game feel more believable and real. Their various missions help to teach you more about them. Cora looks up to the Asari, and her loyalty mission delves into the idea of what happens when you meet your heroes.
I chose protecting all these people over a single life. The choice they train us to make, Lieutenant.
But you didn't tell anyone.
Because then you wouldn't be their shining hero. And maybe that's how it should be.
Jal, the new Angaran member, has his mission show what happens when you deal with hard topics like racism and what it can do to families.
I lost my mind, Jal. I want to go home.
But the cause. I joined because of you.
I shot our brother.
And while these missions are for them, you still have choices to make in them that change the outcomes.
And reveal the resistance for the traitors they are. The alien is not the monster here.
And with that, what your companion takes from it as their character development. Like a typical Mass Effect game, you can even get into relationships with, oh god, no! That scene aside. Let's move on. By the way, doing your companion's loyalty missions unlocks them being able to max out their skill levels. Companions aside, I did say there were different groups and factions that help to build out the world itself. Examples would be the leadership of the Andromeda Initiative, the exiles who caused a mutiny in the Initiative, and the two alien races that hail from Andromeda and are already established. Your character, insert name here, Ryder, has a backstory just like Shepard did in the original games. It's still open for you to add in your own backstory for role-playing purposes, as a lot of it is left ambiguous. However, your character does have pre-existing relationships with their family from the Milky Way galaxy that came over with them. Just as Shepard knew people from their past in the originals, so too does Ryder. With the player playing as the Pathfinder and being the main character, you have quite a bit of say in what happens in this cluster. Leaders can change based on your decisions while you try to figure out the various mysteries throughout the system. You are the only Pathfinder from the start of the game that made it to the location. The other arcs are missing, and with that, they're Pathfinders too. While the ones that made it are still trying to get a foothold on the Nexus, Andromeda's version of the Citadel from the original trilogy, you are a small group going out to help make planets livable and find the other arcs in question. All this while a new antagonist, the Ket, is out against everyone in the system. This new antagonist isn't the only alien presence in Andromeda. There's a good group that you meet called the Angara. Meeting them and building a relationship between them and all of the Initiative is part of the Pathfinder's job. They have their own problems too that you help with, and stabilize this newfound relationship. The story itself starts off strong, with us going to one of the failed Golden Worlds, when all this stuff starts to go south. But after everything is said and done with the intro section, you understand the state of things in Andromeda, and it's your mission to start turning that around. the quests open up to you more and more as you progress the main story overall. If you get too far in the main story, some quests can even fail from that, as they're time sensitive. The system and how they show up and fail helps to make it into a more living and breathing world. With all of the story systems in place, it still very much has that Mass Effect feel to it. It's still an interesting story with its fair share of twists and consequences from your choices, not to mention the relationship with your crew. All things considered, Mass Effect Andromeda is still a good game with plenty that adds to its universe. From the gameplay, setting, and story, it does a great job at setting itself up as what it was supposed to be, the first game in a new series. While we might not be seeing where it could have gone in the future anymore, to discredit what it was is a disservice to the franchise. While I understand there won't be any more games in the future for this storyline, if you are curious at all, or even have some free time to kill, I can still recommend playing through this game if you want some fun. The great characters themselves with their believable story arcs, coupled with having choices and consequences that make everyone's playthrough unique, still make this a good spin-off to play and true to the series' roots. If you treat it like the spin-off it is, it'll help tide you over until the next Mass Effect game comes out. It's not perfect, but it's got much more going on for it than the initial reception would have you believe.